Hello,
Yeah.
am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So I'd like to apologize for the technical issue, which I could not join it at 6 o'clock. I'm very sorry for the delay. Professor Padma Sarangapani Garu, Chairman, Center for Excellence in Teacher Education, TIS Mumbai. Professor Ajay Singh, Co-Chairperson, CETE, TIS Mumbai. Andrew Moore, Chief Information Officer, Boulder Valley School. Professor Ritesh, Professor Sonia, Dr. Suresh Babu Garu, and our team from SCERT, Gopal Garu and Ramaswamy Garu, all the headmasters who have joined this program. Very welcome. I welcome all of you to this 2-day orientation program on the use of technology for school operations, management, and teaching learning facilitation, organized by the School Leadership Academy, SCERT, in association with the Connected Learning Initiative, CLICS. I'm very glad that we are organizing this orientation program at the appropriate time, because we all know that schools have opened in Telangana from 1st September. And just today morning, we were interacting with a few teachers, the primary schools, and they all were pointing out and telling us that because of COVID, the children have lost there's a lot of learning loss for the children, and it's very difficult for them to come to schools, because most of the children in third class, they have missed out on class 1 and 2 due to COVID pandemic. So all this, they are facing a lot of challenges because of the COVID situation. And now though the attendance in the schools is gradually improving day by day, but still they have a lot of challenges to face. So while getting the children to school is one challenge, retaining them and providing them the required learning is another challenge, which the headmasters are going to face in the next few months, and almost maybe a year or two also we'll still be having this kind of learning loss. So it is very appropriate that we need to have this orientation program wherein we can equip the headmasters to use the digital and the technology available to empower them, so that they can bring about the required changes which they need to bring about in the system of education, in the teaching learning process, so that it will be beneficial for the students. So as you all are aware that we have been using, because before the pandemic, we were not we were not using more of technology. I should be saying the use of technology was very limited, but the pandemic, which had started nearly 18 months ago, has really brought a sea change. And I am glad to share that the teachers and all of them have really geared up. The entire educational administration also has geared up, and we were able to provide online classes through different platforms, like the TSAT classes were telecast through TSAT, as well as a large number of teachers and the headmasters of the schools. They have prepared their own material and small videos and all to enable the children, and they did really a lot of good work, wherein a lot of WhatsApp groups were formed so that they could connect with the children. And there were instances where the teachers went to the homes of the students and try to bring them back and try to connect with the teaching learning process even in the pandemic. So that is one of the things, and really now we need to take this further by organizing this 2-day orientation program, so that it will empower the headmasters and the teachers more, and we can use this in a very proper fashion. I really thank all the participants for having joined this program, and I really feel that this 2-day orientation program will be beneficial to all the participants who are participating here. Thank you. I request Suresh Babu to take it further.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for that message. And we are very, very happy that you have chosen to invite not merely the school heads of click schools, but indeed the primary, upper primary and secondary school heads of all the districts of the state. So this is a great opportunity for us also to share our experiences through the distinguished panel we have with us today. Thank you for your message, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now, may I request Dr. Suresh Babu? He is coordinator of the School Leadership Academy of SCERT, and he is also the head of the Maths and the Science Department of SCERT. Sir, may I request you to set the context of school leadership? Can you help us understand the school leadership context in Telangana, sir? Over to you.
Thank you, Karthik. Good evening to everyone, except Mr. Andrew Moore. Is good morning for him. I welcome Padma Sarangapani, chairperson, and Ajay Singh, co-chairperson of CET TIS Mumbai, and also Andrew Moore, joined from US. He is an information officer, Boulder Valley School, District Colorado, and also Ritish, the Professor Ritish, and Sonia Shane from TIS Hyderabad. I also welcome the resource persons for tomorrow's program, that's Gopal, Viranala, and Ramaswamy, who are the school heads of the Telangana state, and also the other school heads who joined through the Zoom platform, as well as the program being streamed through the School Leadership Academy official channel in YouTube. Our director, SCRT madam, rightly told about the lapses that has been done, particularly the loss of education, the loss of learning, you can say. The main issue is how to overcome this loss of learning is one issue. The other issue is how to attain the learning competencies, or you can say the agenda which is set up for the present academic year. So both things we have to do. 18 months learning loss, we have to cope up, and we have to cope up with the present teaching syllabus, you can say the syllabus of the present academic year. This is a very different aspect, and where the school heads has to play a very important role in planning process and also in the monitoring, in the management. Particularly where we have to focus on the children, tracking of the children learning. That's a very special emphasis we have to make, because remedial teaching, giving the remedial teaching is one aspect, and second one is the catering to the individual differences according to as per the needs, and then catching up with the present academic program or academic syllabus. And how to cater this individual difference is a very difficult task when we take about 100 students or 200 students. Generally, we will find in primary schools, there are different setups out there. In primary schools, we will have the strength from right from 50 to 200, whereas the high schools, it ranges from 200 to 2000 also. So these are the very crowded classrooms. You will find some schools you won't much find. These are diverse situations, rural background, urban background, and tribal, remote places, tribal settings. These are diverse conditions, access to the gadgets or the internet facility. There are so many problems out there. We know pretty well, and we are aware of that one. Apart from this, or in spite of these difficulties, how you can cope up, that is an issue. How the school heads can smoothen the academic year to go ahead to face these learning challenges, particularly the challenges coming from the students and coming from the teachers also. And how to convince the parents also is a very important task in this present COVID, because many students are not coming to the school even today. So again, there's learning loss will be there for that particular section, how to cope up with such people. So these are very diverse. Some you have to go for the blended teaching learning process or something. So how to reach the lost child, that's an important issue. So we have to come. Anyway, these are the certain issues, of course, we will discuss, but I would like to present a brief present what the School Leadership Academy has done from 2018 onwards. I have a small presentation where we can, what things we are doing and what help we can take from the clicks that we can indicate the roadmap. Is it my presentation visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Say this School Leadership Academy was started in the year 2018, the December 2018, you can say early months of the 2019, we can say. From that period, we started giving a training to the school heads. And of course, through a conventional face-to-face approach we adopted initially. And we conducted a series of programs for the school heads of 10 days. And sometimes, depending upon the constraint of time and resources, we used to conduct for 5 to 6 days also. But anyway, about in all the districts, covering all 31, earlier it was 31 districts, now it is 33 districts, but we could train about nearly about 1,800 school heads in the school leadership development program. Of course, you know the pretty well the school leadership development program. This is based on the national curriculum framework of the National Center for School Leadership. I think you know it started with the NEPA. They have some 7 strands of that one in that curriculum. Based on that curriculum, we are giving the training. What is the perspectives of the school leadership, leading change. You can say leading the teaching learning process, building partnerships, team building, but a very important one, in leading the innovation, so and so on. And of course, there's one school management administration is one of the component of the curriculum framework. So all these 7 aspects we are focusing and we are giving the training to the school heads. So far, 1,800 school heads were covered in all the districts. And among that, there's the 2-tier structure is the trainings. One training we are giving at the state level, that is called the State Resource Group. As you have the master trainers in your cliques, where we have trained so many master trainers from Telangana state. I know pretty well. I was associated with that program also. So similarly here for the school, exclusive for the school leadership also, nearly we have got about SRG, State Resource Group persons trained at the state level, about 240. And this is mainly focused for the secondary level and also for the primary level also we have conducted. One batch we have conducted about 60 participants, where among these 240, you will find 60 participants from primary level. Because the primary level, that there's no separate dedicated cadre is there, as you find for the school heads for the secondary level. For primary, there's no such dedicated. Only one cadre is there, that's called the LFLHM. That's a very limited number. That's a low female literacy, where that's a sanction, the post were sanctioned, where the female literacy, that was happened in 70s and 80s. Same tag is continued right now. Wherever the good strength is more in that primary schools, that sanctioned post is allocated, that LFLHM will call. So from that pool, we have taken about 60 LFLHMs were trained at the state level. This is a pool of the what human resources we have right now. This was done in the part of 2018 and 2019 also, before the pandemic came. And this is one area where we are trying to build the capacity building of the school heads that we did. And of course, it is continuous processes. And the second area, we put a lot of efforts for the documentation of the best practices, best school practices. In that effort, we in 2019 and 20, we documented about 60 school success stories. That's where I had given the title for we brought this book also in the print form. There's a transformation of schools into vibrant learning hubs. And also we try to focus on the development of videos which reflects the best school practices which are going across the state. So these are the two things that we had taken up. That was started in the year 1920 and 2021, and now also we are doing that one. This continuous process. It's not a one-end process. This is the first book, Vibrant Transformation of Schools into Vibrant Learning Hub, that was brought in the year 2020. In 2020, again, we brought one more book that's called The Forerunners. It's published by the Department of School Education, Government of Telangana. And another one, the third one, just we are trying to get this book. The third is the Rise, and the third book is the Insights of the New Age Schools. This is the third book that we are going to bring out into the public forum. So these three books carries all the success stories of all the schools, the primary school, upper primary school, and high school, of only the government schools that we are talking. The School Leadership Academy is confined to the activities for the strengthening of the school heads for the government. So we are taking only the government school projects right now. Of course, these government schools are also scattered into different managements. Perhaps you know it. One is the government management is there. Another one is the local bodies is there, and you will find some Telangana state model schools are there, and also KGBs. Apart from this, you will find the residential schools scattered under different managements. One is under social welfare, education department, tribal welfare, and so on and so on. And we are trying to reach the other managements also. And last year we did a training for the tribal school heads also. About in 2020 we did that one. For about 45 members, we did training for the school heads on the school leadership. And of course, for showcasing our best practices, we had developed certain videos. These videos were put in the launch of in the YouTube channels. So we had School Leadership Academy-SCERT Telangana official channel. YouTube was launched, and we placed about 11 videos of the best practices, and also there are certain videos reflecting the best teaching learning process. Also, we have placed in that in the YouTube channel. And apart from this, in the website also, in the SCERT website also, we place all the publications and also the videos that we have uploaded in the YouTube channel, also placed in the SCERT website. And so far the subscription of the YouTube channel of which is 7.89. Of course, it's very less. Still, it has to grow up because there are about 20,000 schools are there of primary and upper primary and high school of government institutions. So the subscription, there's a potential of potential is there. It can raise up to 20,000 in subscription. We are trying for that one. And apart from that, of course, due to the pandemic, we couldn't handle the face-to-face training. That's a major handicap. But in spite of that, because of the ICT development, or you can say, we could organize some training programs in association with the SCERT and also with the cliques we did, and also independently we did certain programs. Some of the training programs you can see where training on attitude and behavioral change for the school leadership, for school leaders, you can say that for school leaders during COVID pandemic. In association with the NIRD, we did a training on management of well-being during COVID pandemic in association with the NIRD Guwahati, where the record number of registrations happened. That about 55,000 registrations were happened, and more than 1 lakh viewers were there. It was mainstream through YouTube channel, and it crossed the more than 1 lakh viewers. This is one important area we did. Another one is the school leadership and the teacher professional development from the NCSL. And also we did a pandemic specific, what is the role of the school leaders to in the COVID situation, how you can overcome the crisis or it may be a learning crisis, or you can say educating about the COVID, appropriate behavior. These all things were dealt in that particular topic. And very recently we did, depending where the UNICEF and the NCERT has developed a certain module, there are standard procedures were there. Based on the standard operating procedures, we conducted a massive webinar on the COVID-19 responsive behavior, where about it was the viewership crossed about somewhere 80,000 viewership is there. And apart from that, we have organized specific programs for the KGBB school heads also. KGBB, that's called the special officer, there are school heads on these particular topics like the learning organizations, teachers as a reflective practice, about time management, particularly on the adolescent girls, how to deal with the adolescent girls. These are the certain topics that we dealt. In association with the CLICS also, we did online sessions for April and December in different spaces for the schools. So I think about covering 14 districts, and where more than 2,000 school heads were participated in this program. On different schedules were given for this school heads, because there are 14 districts were there. So which this 14 districts falls under the erstwhile districts called undivided districts. The 3 districts. So in 3 spells it was conducted for this 2,108 diagnosis. And apart from this, of course, we know pretty well the efforts of the TIS here, under the CLICS project, where they conducted trainings for online trainings for the teachers also, on the particularly focusing on the ICT skills. And for this, as at most of the school heads also, the focus was given for ICT. And apart from that, they did training. We lauded the efforts of the CLICS program, because they trained the school heads, they trained the teachers, and they trained the Samagra Shiksha district officials also on the ICT, and as well as the teaching learning support systems. Apart from that, they dealt training programs, particularly on the ICT and other pedagogy for the DLED courses also. That's district primary level education programs. So this teacher trainings, for the teacher trainings also, they did the program. So of course, all these programs we have on the go of the School Leadership Academy also we are associated with this CLICS for this program, on these programs. Yes, recently we did from the School Leadership Academy, we developed 9 modules for the Telugu version for the online course of the National Center for School Leadership. These 9 courses, you will find courses on the team management, you will find the modules on the gender sensitivity, you will find the modules on the inclusive education. Like that, there are so many courses we have developed, and this is going to be put in the website of the NCSL also. And in February 21, with the Save the Children organization, we conducted a very good program, that's a national consultative meet, where we invited the professors from the NIPA and the NCERT, where they joined in this program, and also the officials from the Save Children also joined. And of course, this program was mainstreamed to Zoom platform, and about at that time, the 2,000 school heads were participated live in the live proceedings. And of course, for projecting the different pedagogical tool as a toys as a pedagogical tool, the slogan was given by the NCERT, and also where India Type Fair was conducted in February, where the Prime Minister chaired that session. For that also, we focused on this, where we have organized the workshops for the teachers, and we could gather about 21 teachers for presenting their toys in the India Toy Fair. So, but I think 11 or somewhere 12 participants took participation. Of course, we invited about 27 to 28. We identified them, but about 12 participants were participated, and they focused mainly on the toys as a tool of pedagogy. That is with the theme, they presented their toys in the exhibition. And of course, apart from that, we could collect on the due to the pandemic, of course, a lot of efforts were made by the teaching community where we tried to document the 22 and so far 22 human interest stories of the school students, reflections of the teachers and parents faced during the pandemic that also we have collected. And these are the certain things we did in this during this pandemic. So these are the certain things we could do from the School Leadership Academy, what we did. This is we try to showcase the things. Now the issue is that, okay, what are the ICT programs that we did or with the association with the clinics or we independently we did? It's for the schoolers particularly, that focus was given on only on the ICT utilization for the teaching learning process. What I feel is that we have to provide the environment, ecosystem in the schools for continuing the ICT education. No doubt that is in a one major area, but the second area is the for the governance, particularly for governance of the school, where our program was designed for the school operation, day-to-day school operations, for the day-to-day school management, where how can we use the ICT? That is a very important objective of this program, what I believe, and that is a need of the program. Because what are the orientations we did, whether through the clicks or for the with the CDAC, we did the training programs through CDAC also we did, but that was only on the support of the teaching learning process. How to use the ICT tools for the learning or using of ICT tools for teaching, but not for the management, school management or school governance. That things were not covered. So this is a gray area, what I feel, where we can focus, because the proper ecosystem should be prevailed in this classroom. Then only if the ICT can be used for the teaching learning process, that equally important for the school governance also, because we have to compete. The competition is there. We have to grow. We are saying to the 21st century skills, we have to imbibe the 21st skills, and we have to move ahead. Only the teaching learning process is not enough. The support systems also should be technological enabled. So in that field, I think where our school, particularly the government, the schools in the government sector are very lacking behind. Of course, we are far ahead in the teaching learning process where, yes, of course, our director, SCRT, madam told, yes, due to the pandemic, it has given an opportunity for the children to for the teachers to expose the technology. Yes, I do appreciate many teachers. Of course, we have the core groups are there, we have master trainers, but that was a limited number before the pandemic. But when the pandemic came, and many teachers voluntarily, many schoolers voluntarily resorted for the teaching learning process, adapting the remote learning tools. So that is of course, where the teachers could not handle the earlier, where was confined to digital classes. The digital classes means generally our conventional TV programs, okay, that we are calling it the digital classes. Only just they used to show the digital classes. That was a major thing used to happen. But when the pandemic came, many teachers, and including the school heads, were eager to learn the ICT tools that could be employed for the teaching learning purpose. And many got exposure also. And one thing very important development is just these teachers are not the end users. Many of these teachers have become the content creators also. That's a very good sign that we can see in the Telangana state. Many people have become a content creators. Right now, they are developing their own programs. They are developing their own video program. They're developing their own tools also for the teaching learning process, for school classroom management, for the learning, tracking the learning of the children, and executing the question paper, preparing the question paper, and even assessment also they are trying to do. So these things are happening at the school level, of course, by the teacher. But the same thing is not happening with the school headmasters. There is a certain limitation. Of course, headmasters also involved, but just they were exposed to only to the teaching learning process where they can use the tools. That exposure they got, but not administration side. So for the better governance, for the better administration, for making our schools as a smart schools, So governance and administration, or you can say for the operation of the schools, this technology enabled schools we have to build. So I think this is an opportunity where we can make our schools technological friendly. In the management of the schools also, we can focus on that issue. So that it's not just this by this program. This is an only introduction. This is only introduction only, I think, because it has to be sustained. It has to go for a long time. So it is a beginning. I think this program is a beginning for that, what I believe. So very frequent interface of this program with by online or face-to-face or blended approach. So I think these areas we have to touch. So that's what I think. This is a very important, necessary for the school heads to make the school, to make our schools as a very modern schools, leading to towards the 21st century. Just mirroring, parroting the 21st century skills is not enough. Where we have to grow professionally and where we have to take our schools to the 21st century through technological enabled environment. That ecosystem that should be there. If the ecosystem is there, naturally it gives a support to the teachers, and it gives support to the children also, for the learners also. So that's what I think that's the main objective of this program, what I feel, where I appreciate the clicks which have come forward to take this program, and this will be continued and this will be sustained for a long time. So far as long as our schools become well equipped with the technological enabled schools in administration and governance of schools, for better functioning of the schools, for better effective functioning of schools. I think this is my humble request for the organizer also. Thank you. Thank you for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I think you have really given us a snapshot of the various initiatives taken up by the School Leadership Academy, and you have also brought out very clearly that there is indeed a felt need for better use of technology, especially in respect of the school operation cycle management. Thank you so much for your message. I'm sure this will help the distinguished panel with us. I'm sure some of the concerns you have raised will be addressed or will be reflected upon in the address to be given by the distinguished panel. Thank you so much for your message. We now go to the next part where we have a very distinguished panel with us, and we begin with Professor Padma Sarangpani. Professor Padma Sarangpani is a professor of education and the chairperson of the Center of Excellence in Teacher Education, TIS Mumbai. She has about 30 years of experience as a researcher and field practitioner, working with the federal, states, and national policy and field experience of rural and tribal areas in India. She has won several fellowships and awards which have been channelized to strengthen the center, with strong international collaborations leading to research and advocacy relevant to issues of quality with equity, culture and education, improvement of education systems in the global south. She has been an expert with the UNESCO's Teacher Task Force Policy Dialogue Forums. She was also a core member of the drafting committee of the National Curriculum Framework on School Education, 2005. Professor Sarangpani has led several research studies, including large-scale field action studies, innovating and trialing models of practice in the in-service and pre-service space, leading to the publication of research papers, policy briefs, source books, and handbooks. Several of these have involved collaborative networks, both national and international, and involving state governments, NGOs, and institutes of higher education. Professor Sarangpani has also led several complex collaborative initiatives involving coordination with multiple agencies.
Enough.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Really, thank you for taking time for this program. We eagerly look forward to your address, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm really very honored to be a part of this event, and as I've seen from the program, my presentation is supposed to really get the discussion going and have contributions from our important invitees on this panel to contribute. So I'm pleased to just introduce the topic of today's discussion. I think Suresh Babu Garu, your presentation on the work of the School Leadership Academy is really impressive. And I'm sure that under the guidance of this Leadership Academy, much more meaningful support to school heads to achieve the transformation of schools, to support new technologies to get integrated meaningfully into classrooms can be achieved. And as you correctly pointed out, a lot of this needs to happen by doing things on the ground, documenting good practices and giving them back to the professional community. And I'm really impressed by the efforts that you have already made. Today, I want to share with you just a few ideas to get this discussion going. And I'm drawing a lot of this from experience in the Connected Learning Initiative of strengthening school systems to integrate technology meaningfully into the teaching learning processes of the school. But I'm also drawing on some work that I did with the Ministry of Human Resource Development in 2011 on how we can approach the question of school improvement, which is, needless to say, an important question in the country. And when we talk about school improvement and improving education for all, I think the equity question is really important. And for the public schooling system particularly, we cannot speak of quality without looking at the question of inclusion and access of everybody to quality. So we developed this through a lot of consultation with the states, visits to states, and understanding practices of the school supervision structures of the state. We realized that the approach to school improvement in the Indian context has to be seen as a synergistic approach, which kind of looks at the ecosystem of actors participating in education and being channelized towards school improvement. So at the one end, we have community, and at the other hand, we have the institution of school, and school improvement really needs to be able to take and leverage all these actors towards overall transformation. Clearly, there are different dimensions in which school heads need to play a role. There is the overall school functioning, which needs active work by the entire school community. There's the academic work within the school that needs the attention of, it needs a lot of instructional leadership to take place. There are equity concerns that the school as a community, especially the government schooling system, needs to be very conscious about and find ways of addressing. And there are the linkages between community and school that we need to constantly address. I think more than ever, COVID reminds us, and as the director SCERT pointed out already, impact on the community is directly felt in the school, and school community relationships continues to be a very important dimension of entire school functioning and a concern for school improvement. So who is involved in school improvement? Of course, within the school, it's not just the school head, but it's a community of teachers and pupils interacting with parents and community on the one side, and interacting with the entire school supervisory structures on the other side, the block and the cluster resource center, and the entire linkages up to SCERT and the School Leadership Academy. I want to just focus on this idea of facilitative leadership, which has emerged as an important way of approaching school leadership. And that's really a more appropriate approach to school leadership, which is relevant in today's context. Earlier, largely school heads were more like figures of authority, and they had to maintain the functioning of the school. They had to ensure that teachers will obey, follow orders, and implement practices. But the school today is, the heads of schools today need to be much more problem solving in their approach. And their own authority in the school cannot derive just from being, you cannot derive your authority simply because you're a headmaster. Your authority really comes from your own personal characteristics, your professional competencies and commitment, and what you enable to happen in the school, the kind of collegiality you cultivate, and the kind of cooperation you're able to build among all these actors who are involved with school. So this collaborative approach and being able to solve problems is really a very important part of school leaders of today. And so simply being figures of authority is not going to be enough. We expect school leaders to solve many problems and to work with the ecosystem in which schools are located. If you look up this idea of facilitative leadership, I mean, there are related ideas, the concept of democratic leadership, of collaborative leadership. You will find all these ideas, but they basically hint at the same kinds of qualities that school heads need to have, of being able to overcome the resource constraints, funding constraints, information constraints in which schools find themselves, being able to maximize the energy which is there in the school, especially from your colleagues as teachers, and to be able to kind of ensure that you're able to keep the school functioning in a very engaged way with the community on the one side, the students in your school, and the education bureaucracy on the other side. And this is an important and valuable idea, which is very relevant, especially when we think about integrating ICT into both pedagogic practices as well as an overall improvement of school functioning. So we're really not talking about using ICT for monitorial practices of school leadership in which we keep an eye on others and we manage performance, but we're really talking about processes of facilitating collegial solving and addressing of school related problems. When we were working on the approaches to improving government schools work for the MHRD, we found this image of what needs to happen in a school is very important. I mean, there are many components that need to work in a school. And what is important about it is that if we work on even one component, then all the other wheels also have to move and begin to move. So, I mean, it's really this interlinking set of issues with which school leaders are involved. In fact, it's never just one thing. It's a little bit of everything that is the responsibility of a school leader. So it's complementary and it's interconnected. And this is really important. COVID has shown us that our ability to be resilient as a school system is the most important quality, which will enable us to overcome unexpected disasters and situations that we face. And for this, resourcefulness and professional autonomy are very, very important characteristics of school leaders. I'm going to end by just sharing with you one slide of the important characteristics that emerged from our own research on CLICS implementation. And this draws attention to some of the kinds of things that we expect and need school leaders to be able to nurture. It was clear that ICT was not going to work on its own in the school. And if you just leave children alone with ICT in their school labs, no miracles in learning are achieved. It was really important that the school organize its structure and its timetable to ensure that teachers are there in the lab when ICT is being used. So just small little things like better timetabling is a very important area of academic instruction and leadership to enhance ICT use in the school. Again, we found that if the issues that emerge in the lab go unattended, then the lab becomes dysfunctional and the entire effort to integrate ICT collapses. So it's in the small details that really we found school heads were resourceful, figuring out how to solve maintenance questions of the lab without too much delays. We also found that if an idea was not being implemented on scale, then the ability of the state to supervise it was more limited. So I would again say, I mean, and it's correct, I think, that if we are thinking of introducing new innovation into curriculum, we should be trying to do it at the block level or at the district level so that the school supervisory structures are aligned to the transformation which is being achieved in a school. If we just bring about changes in single schools, then the system is not able to oversight or to exercise oversight over it adequately. Within the school, we found that the head being oriented and the head being able to support the teachers within the school was a very important enabler of ICT adoption. So your role as school leaders is really very important. It is your own conviction and your ability to lead integration of ICT, which will really make a difference on the ground in terms of teachers adopting and the system and being able to benefit from ICT integration at the systemic level. We also found that it was really important to exercise oversight on the quality of what we are giving to students. it's not enough to just give ICT, but it has to be really relevant, high quality resource that we make available. And that again made a lot of difference. And the more interactive the learning was, the more student-centric the learning was, the better the levels of ICT adoption were. And that's again really an important insight, that if we're able to enhance quality of student-centric practices in the classroom, that benefits the system and there's much higher level of adoption within the system. So I really look forward to the possibilities within this particular, of the possibilities that this workshop will trigger in terms of enabling school heads to see yourselves as very important actors in enabling this entire synergy to take place within the school as a site, and to realize that you will need to work with a range of stakeholders, and your own leadership is in how you facilitate varied stakeholders to align to the goal of the school, which is to improve quality education for students for all. I'm going to just stop with these remarks, and I'm going to, so that's really your role as a school head, to synergize school improvement and enable it to benefit students especially. With that, I'd like to stop, and I'd like to invite the panelists of this session. We have three really very experienced and eminent panelists joining us today. I'm going to hand it back to Karthik to introduce the panelists and invite them to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. That was indeed a very brief message, but a number of takeaways packed in that brief message. Definitely the combination of professional qualifications and the personal qualities to be a persuasive leader. ICT not just for monitoring, but also for helping the teachers improve their teaching practice. Thank you also for touching upon certain, though not conceptual issues, but very important operational issues that we are also able to see. As you were speaking, we were actually relating some of those things that we have seen as part of CLICS, the lab, the importance of the school head in pushing for lab maintenance and the timetabling and stuff like that. Thanks a lot for the brief message, ma'am. We now we now have a session by Professor Ritesh Kanyakari. Professor Ritesh is an associate professor at TIS Azim Premji School of Education. He did his doctoral research from the Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education, PIFR, Mumbai. He engages in teaching, research, and advocacy in the areas of science education, design and technology education, and teacher education. He has developed and taught courses in BA, MA, MPhil, and PhD graduate school. Professor Ritesh was also involved in the development of BEd and BEd MEd courses. He continues to mentor research dissertations at the MA and PhD levels.
Karthik, that should be okay. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to begin by thanking TSCRT for sharing the kind of work that has been undertaken, and also inviting us to be a part of this, interactive exchange, so that we benefit and also sustain this partnership over a period of time. I would just like to, anchor my ideas with the help of a presentation. Of course, I would like to speak a little bit about this idea of managing teaching learning, particularly in a time where pandemic was quite prominent, and the issue of handling teaching learning in this context became very central. I think I'll make an effort to make a connect with ICT and Dispose through a conceptual viewpoint, and I hope that this perspective enriches our discussion over here. There are several thoughts that were there, but I must say, I just want to show an image, the image of a sea and a boat, sailing boat, and education trying to find direction and optimize from the winds to kind of navigate the journey that is there. And certainly there are certain uncertainties which may come up, which may crop up, which may shake a little of our orientations, but certainly will also provide opportunities to explore new horizons. I just want to go back to the larger conceptual question that we often ask about the purpose of education. And I think perhaps even in this pandemic time, it has invoked us to think about what is this larger purpose of education, and what should we, whether education outweighs health, or whether education is about thinking about health issues, or is it also about a greater sense of society and a connect with the kind of issues that society faces every now and then, perhaps much more prominently in the pandemic time. And we certainly have some explicit agenda which we often talk about as able citizenship, preparation for careers, or improving the quality of life. But there are certain implicit or hidden agenda that kind of goes with it, when we would like to see our learners to have moral accountability, develop habits and virtues, have certain orientations which integrate the political and cultural orientation, and look for a social life which is guided by principles of justice, peace, and democracy. Of course, this kind of an imagination or a capture of purposes may not be comprehensive, but when we turn back to the scholars who have spoken about this larger purpose of education and have thought about what kind of ails the education system, there have been a variety of ideas that have come up. Certainly, I'm not going to revisit in great detail each of these ideas, but what I would like to draw your attention to is that each of these educational thinkers have thought about the problem of education and imagined a way to circumvent the problem. And in doing so, there is a kind of an achievement or a goal of education that is being realized. So, for example, Dewey, when he talks about this, overcoming this idea of duality between theory and practice, is actually envisioning a greater understanding of democratic principles and practice of democracy in our classrooms, so that the national development or progress could be contoured around, or the societal development can be contoured along those lines. Where similarly, when we would talk about issues of countering the social stratification and addressing issues of justice and looking forward for emancipation, we would think education as an instrument of liberation and social emancipation. The point that I'm trying to make over here is that there has been an accumulated history in terms of the thinking about education and its purpose. And we notice that based on the emphasis or the focus on education, you would have certain goals which would get realized. And these are in their own selves, very important and central to development of society. So I'll move on to the idea, therefore, that education, either in terms of the larger purpose or in terms of its orientation, cannot be fixated into one line or one trajectory of growth, which makes us to ask ourselves, is that really true in our societies? And if we actually look at this, I would have loved to play this animation if that is possible. If we compare the kind of eras that have gone, and this is a representation not to scale, we find that in the earlier times, there was a lot of emphasis on family and community livelihoods, and occupations and livelihoods came out of these kind of professions of practice, and schools were trying to cater to these ideas. But when you look at over time, these things have differentiated and also changed in their emphasis over there. So much so that there was an isolation of the family and the households from the career and the institutional learning processes that happened, which led to foregrounding certain ideas of distinction between theory and practice, between skills and internship. And if we look at the modern era, we find a certain variation that was towards specialization of certain kinds of skills. Now, what does this tell us? This tells us that over a period of time, we have been evolving in our orientations towards the purposes of education and how we realize this education. In effect, when we ask this question in a more recent times, basically just before pandemic, during 2019, when the pandemic had onset, and then there was the proliferation of pandemic, the questions of what is to be learned, what is to be taught, and how is to be teaching to happen were also relevant. And the larger concern came from another idea of whether there will be losses in learning. Now, this problem also led to imagination of newer imaginations of how education would be possible. For example, what would be the conditions that would make effective teaching possible? And what kind of reimagination or recontouring of learning is required? When we look at historically, again, back, we look at teaching and learning process. And when we look at theories of learning, we have abundant literature which talks about learning and teaching happening along various axes. It may be towards achieving behavioral change, problem solving, construction of experiences, social action, contextual or situated learning, or an adaptive process. I'm not going to go into details of this, but the point that I want to drive home is the idea if teaching and learning can happen through these diverse trajectories, certainly then there would be diverse kinds of solutions or ways of looking at teaching and learning. And therefore, there cannot be one universal way of managing teaching learning. Okay, perhaps the demands, the requirements, and the positioning of the learners in these various trajectories of thinking about teaching learning would vary. And we would like to, experiment perhaps with the idea of what would be a more suitable, a more appropriate idea for our own context. And it is towards that point that I would like to move ahead. In terms of learning, we notice that learning is not just, communicating of the content. And certainly, an audience in education certainly need not be told about this, or this aspect need not to be discussed. But there are interesting aspects that need to be foregrounded, particularly in terms of the teaching learning resources and the teaching learning environments. Often we equate the resources with the environment. And that, I believe, is a problem, because resources enable certain kinds of activities, enable certain opportunities of learning. Environments also do so. But environments also create certain lines of inquiry or certain possibilities, which perhaps exclusively having the resources may not allow you to do. For example, one may have a mobile phone, but can it afford for a learning environment is a question that you perhaps would like to consider. So what becomes central is how we locate learning in time and space within these various aspects that determine learning. And if we look at it, learning is, if we look at this image on the right-hand side, we find that teaching learning is governed by the settings in which learning happens, is also dependent on the kinds of engagement that are possible. It is also dictated by the sources of knowledge and the experiences that one can tie to. In other words, we have had this assimilated wisdom for years, okay? But the idea of a tension being resurfacing in the pandemic certainly leads us to some newer ways of imagining teaching learning processes. Again, I go back to history where, textbooks have been taught of as vehicles for education, and the living word of the teacher need to be emphasized more as compared to text or content, is being said by Gandhi, by Tagore, and by Krishnamurti. So you have different people who have foregrounded this idea. Now, the kind of question that I would turn to, if not textbooks, then what are the resources? And whether these resources will be able to address this question between information versus knowledge. If we have a platform for teaching learning, should it become a platform for communicating information, or should it become a source for continuity of knowledge building? Should it become a part of expert judgment, or should it become an opportunity to bring the learner needs into focus? Should it have orchestrated topics, or should it have opportunities for comprehensive treatment of learning? This is just a hypothetical example where we look at various pedagogies and various ways of engaging and how a distribution of minds-on and hands-on can occur. Okay, so in our educational system, perhaps with the coming of the pandemic and the felt crunch of resources, perhaps we need to be guided onto these paths where tinkering or guided learning or project-based learning allows for a greater ownership of the learner in the process of teaching learning. Perhaps it is a time to move, from the school-centered learning to, learners' activities-centered learning. So the activity, rather than placing activity within the school, it may be an opportunity for us to see activity in relation to the learner in the context of learning. So let me get to some kind of examples, and I would like to recall Alvin Toffler, who talked about the brave new world. And I would like to make this distinction that we have now been experiencing, where we earlier used to emphasize a lot on hands-on and material experienced world. But now with the coming of the digital age, we are looking for material felt world. So it is a mediation of the technologies, educational technologies, that allow us to make a connect or sense the experiences that we so often look at. If we look at this metaphorically, we see that there is a vast sea of knowledge and learning, and not everything is calm. There are directions, and we may not even have the goal in sight. However, we have certain initiatives and we have certain ways of looking at learner, and that is how perhaps we could bridge the gap between resource-rich environments, but which have been inadequately utilized. And on the other hand, we can look at resource-deficient environments, but which can be optimally utilized. So we may gather on materials from the immediate surroundings to develop or base our teaching learning. There are limits and thresholds, however, in everything, be it ICT or is it online, offline learning. And also a lot of it depends on how we package our content meaningfully for the learners and what kind of positioning we hold with regard to the task of teaching learning. Do we, and I think this has already been spoken earlier by Professor Padma, but there are also new ways of imagining about assessment and evaluation where the learner can become a participant assessor rather than it going to the teacher alone. The learner becomes, and that could become a collaborative endeavor. I'll just take one case example to drive home my point. This is a work with the undergraduates. One of the things that I teach is about the history and philosophy of science and social science ideas at the undergraduate level or the bachelor's level. And one of the things that I tried on through this virtual platform is, many a times you do not know if the learners are attending to you, if they are paying attention to whatever you are talking about. But perhaps if we engage them in an activity, we would be able to see not just the activity outcomes, but also the process of thinking that has gone into it. So here was a case where I invited them to make posters on nature of science or images of science. And here are some really creative posters where here you find science as a collection of ideas, of discipline, of ideas, and of various activities that are involved. And please note the careful color coding that is being used and the synthesis that has been captured in this image. If you look at other examples, you find science as a connected network of variety of things and applications that are there. Now, this may sound very interesting, but there are other posters which bring out other perspectives and notions. For example, there are underpinning principles which lead to certain applications that are making the world a better place. Or there may be consequences of it which may result either in positive or negative as outcomes. Or looking at the relation between science and society, but seeing that there are only elite scientists who are a part of this social group, who never stop questioning. Now, these could be a way of bringing in newer questions into thinking about what science is, whether it is a process, it is an idea, or is it merely an application which you find in everyday life, or whether it is a sequence of steps that one needs to achieve it. The take-home point that I would like to say is that there are ways by which the existing platforms can be mobilized or leveraged to bring in a greater agency for the teachers and a larger ownership for the learners to participate into learning. And I would like to quote Vygotsky, not quote Vygotsky, but draw attention to Vygotsky an idea that it is not just the person or the environment, but it is the activity which is at the core of the interactions between them. And perhaps we need to focus on this activity, and perhaps I must show this, imagery, that as teachers, we perhaps need not manage teaching learning. We need to reimagine teaching learning. And we need not just worry about the pandemic times, but perhaps harness the resources that are available outside of the school to bring learning as a part of the community that is being involved or associated with it. I would just end over there, and I would like to say that we need to harness this pockets of opportunities that arise in classroom. And certainly the idea of best practices, looking for them and discussing them, is a good starting point. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Ditesh. Thank you for that message. I think it's very interesting that like Director SCERT and Dr. Suresh Babu also shared, teachers in Telangana have actually taken the initiative of creating content. So, so there is some amount of crowdsourcing of content, as it were. So it would be very interesting. Perhaps it could come up in the discussion in the panel on how we look at some of that, some of those aspects using the number of ideas you have presented. Thank you so much for your presentation. I now request Professor Sarangpani to invite Dr. Sonia Sani to the panel. I think Professor Sarangpani is facing certain technical glitches. I'll briefly introduce Dr. Sonia Sani. Dr. Sani is an assistant professor with the TIS Azim Premji School of Education at TIS Hyderabad. Her research interests are in the areas of inclusive education and special education needs, equity and social justice, child rights, and socio-emotional learning in schools. She pursues these interests by engaging in research, training, publishing, conducting workshops, and developing curriculum. So I think Professor Sarangpani is facing a technical glitch. So may I request Dr. Sani to please present her idea.
Thank you, Kartik. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas and also learn from everybody else's experiences and also what's happening in the school system here in Telangana. So I'll just share my slides. Let me know if there's a glitch and if they don't move. At times I'm moving them at my end, but they do not move in the presentation. I hope the slides are visible. Okay. So yeah, I'm talking about, sorry. So in talking about technology and how we can bring in technology specifically to improve teaching learning or to support teaching learning within the context of inclusive education and inclusive schools. What I'm doing is briefly touching on inclusive education, talk a little about the universal design learning principle, and then move on to talk about technology, how it can be used, and some of the assistive technologies that we can be using within our classrooms. So we do know that inclusive education is something that has been pushed for quite some time now. Even the latest NEP is asking for inclusive education, but the new thing here with this policy is that they have brought in the term equitable education. So it's not just inclusive education, it's inclusive and equitable education, which means that don't just think about bringing the children in and having them there physically, but also think about ensuring that they have equal opportunities to learn, equal opportunities to be contributing members to the society once they move out of the school system. So, yeah, there seems to be some, yeah. The reason why we are asking for inclusive education is the fact that we live in a world that is diverse and we've got diversity on various counts. So we will see marginalizations getting played out into the school system or exclusion happening in the schools on counts of gender, which would be that women or transgenders get excluded. Social cultural issues could also contribute, so which would mean SCs, STs, religious minorities who will not be able to reach their full potential because of the exclusionary or marginalization practices that are there in school. There's also a divide because of the geographical issues like rural, urban within our context. What's happening in the rural setting would be very different from what's happening in the urban setting. Within the urban settings also, you see vast variations in what's happening in different schools depending on the kind of income backgrounds that the children come from in those schools. So there's also then the socioeconomic conditions that contribute to the diversity and hence the marginalization and exclusion. And then finally, there is the issue of diverse abilities that are there, which means the children with disabilities. Some of them would be disabilities that probably have been certified, which means that they've been to a doctor and there's a certificate to say that the child has a certain disability. In some instances, it's just a teacher's understanding that there's a disability based on certain characteristics that they feel match with the characteristics of whatever disabilities that are there listed out in our policies and identified. So when we are talking about inclusive education, if we go back in history and see how it's progressed within our Indian context, we've started from a time when children with disabilities were completely excluded from the school system and they were not allowed into schools at all, to a system where we segregated them off into special schools. And then we moved into an integrated system, which oftentimes is confused with inclusion. Now, what happens in integration is that the child is in a mainstream school, but many a times in private schools, we see this, that though the child is in the mainstream school, there actually is a special class in the school. And that's kind of like a multi-grade classroom where children from different classrooms are sitting together and there's a special teacher there for these special children. And as and when the teacher feels that the child is able to cope up with their regular content, the child is moved to the class, to the main class. And if there are issues, the child comes back to the special class. So the focus here in this integrated system is that the onus is on the child to match the expectations of the school, to meet the needs of the school, of what has been set out by the school. Whereas inclusion doesn't require a child to do this. Inclusion means that the school makes adjustments to ensure that the child feels welcome and belongs to the classroom and the school system. So whatever the diversity that the child is coming from, the child is part of the main class. The child is at no point pulled out from the classroom for remedial classes or it's games period and the child needs to finish her work, so let's keep the child back. None of this happens in an inclusive system. In an inclusive system, the child is always with her peers and at every opportunity has the chance to participate in the activities that his or her peers are participating in. Now, while I'm talking about this in the context of children with special needs, you can draw implications of this even for the other marginalizations that happen or play out in the school system. When we talk about inclusion, whether it is for children with disabilities or for the larger context, we push for the whole systems approach, which encompasses that there's inclusive policy, there's an inclusive philosophy that's there. We understand that the onus is on us as the school system to make accommodations to be able to ensure that the child has maximum participation or full participation. We understand the child, or we look at the child as a whole, and we have equal expectations of the child, and we do not say that this child has, say, an intellectual disability and they cannot participate in the math class, or they do not sit in the class. So we let the child roam around. They do come into the school and they are like, enrolled in the school, but they don't really sit in the class. None of these things happens, because in an inclusive classroom and under a whole systems approach, I would look at the child for what the child has, what are her capabilities, and where we can support the child to move to the next level. So there are definitely learning outcomes that we are marking out for every child in the classroom, and not restricting ourselves on the basis of what we presume the child is capable of or not capable of. So when we go to this whole systems approach, the principle that comes into play then is the universal design learning principle. The universal design actually comes from the field of architecture, where when you're designing buildings and designing infrastructure, one is supposed to consider the maximum population that would be able to access a facility. So if I'm building a building, constructing a building, then I would say that, okay, there should be a lift, there should be staircase, and there should probably be a ramp too. That will ensure that whatever kind of mobility a person has, they will be able to access all the floors of the building. So we are picking up the same principle into the learning now, and we say that under universal, that every child is going to be catered for, every learner is getting catered for, and we are not considering, what is the normal child capable of, and let's provide for the normal child. We are looking specifically at the children in the margins. We are specifically looking at those learners who do get marginalized, and we're trying to create opportunities for them to learn too. So the kind of curriculum or the lesson plan that we are developing then is specifically, purposefully developed with the needs of this wider population that we are catering to, and again, not catering to the so-called perceived normal children in the classroom, or the ones that we feel will match the requirements that are there. We are looking at the larger group, and we're trying to create a lesson plan that would cater to the needs of almost every child in my classroom. So then the learning that is happening here is based on challenges that we are able to put out for every child. We are supporting every child. We are trying to ensure that barriers for every learner are reduced, and learning is not getting restricted because of the kind of lesson plan that I have. So one example would be that we are having this session on Zoom right now. We all know that everybody has a different learning style. Now, there must be some of you here who can, I would say, match the speed of my speaking, because I'm told very often that I speak very fast. And it's easy for you to connect to what I'm saying and grasp what I'm saying. But some people might not be able to take to that speed, or some of you might just not be auditory learners and would actually work better with visual learning. So in that case, the slide helps. You can see what I'm talking about. And even if you don't listen to me, you still get an understanding of what I'm saying. Another added benefit here would be if you would switch on the captions. So anything that I'm saying gets automatically, the subtitles would come underneath. And if you, for whatever reason, are not able to hear me, if my voice is breaking because of the connection at your end or whatever, the subtitles will help you still understand what is being said. So ideally, that is what we do, that we try and pick up all the options possible so that every learner in any and every situation is able to continue with the learning process. And we from our end have not contributed to the barrier which is restricting somebody from reaching the learning outcomes. So the three principles that we work on with the UDL is the why, what, and how of learning. So the foremost is that we are providing multiple means of engagement for the child. That is the why. That means that we think about why should the child be learning this particular content? How do I interest the child, and what is it that will motivate the child? So in this context, then, what the why for a child in a rural setting would be very different from the why for a child in an urban setting. Somebody might want to learn a certain, so the idea basically is that the content should be relatable for the child. You go to the local setting and try and give the child something that they can relate to, that they understand and they connect with, and hence they are intrinsically motivated to learn and to go with. The second one is the multiple means of representation, which is the what aspect of learning. So we are deciding what is it that we want the child to learn, what is that content that we want them to learn, how are we presenting it to them, and we need to ensure that we are presenting it to them in different ways. Go back to that example where I said that I'll try to meet the needs of a visual learner, an auditory learner, kinesthetic learner, and ensure that everybody is interested in learning that particular activity or content that I'm presenting to them. And finally is an opportunity to for them to use multiple ways in representing what they have learned. So the how aspect of the assessment aspect of things that we are doing, we are not restricting them to meet the assessment requirements that we have. I don't want every child to then write pen and paper exam and give me, the to tell me how much they have learned. The interest here is on the application. So once I have presented the content, what I really want to know is the child able to understand the content and then know where to apply that content? So I can give them various kinds of tasks to do where they are able to show me that they have understood the content and they know how to apply the content. So hence, I'm giving them multiple means for them to represent that particular idea back to me. So here is where now technology comes in. When I'm wanting to do something like this, when I'm wanting to work with the universal design principle, I need to move from the regular lesson planning that I do. So the universal design learning principle helps me build on the content that has been laid down by the government. I do not necessarily need to alter the curriculum that has been laid down, but I find ways in which I can make that curriculum much more interesting to the students. So technology then helps me to ensure that I'm representing the content in various ways for the students. I'm able to simplify text. I'm able to give them audios for the learning. I can probably give them videos for understanding the content. Like I said, subtitles could be offered, sign language options could be brought in, various kinds of these things can be brought in to help the child learn with the use of technology. And with the pandemic, we do realize that technology can help us. I do also understand that in India, we are in, some of us have no options of using digital technology for the lack of access, for the lack of connectivity, for the lack of also the resources, not having a mobile phone or a computer and things like that. But in instances or in cases where it is possible to have access to technology, there's so much more that we can do. And once we bring this in, the learning, teaching learning that happens in the classroom can be enhanced so much further. So here I just listed out a few of the softwares, not softwares, apps actually that are being used. I will share these slides with you so that you have an access to the links. Very easy to maneuver around these apps. They help you make the learning more interactive for the child. Like Padlet is like a wall that's there. The teacher can pose a question there, or the teacher can put out, a discussion, and then ask the students to put their feedback. And the feedback's there on the wall, and everybody gets to read each other's. So it also gives you an opportunity to save the content, share the content. Unlike if we would have had children just speak up in class, then they lose out on that content. So Padlet, because it's in the written format, it's being typed out, it's easier for children to go back to it and see who said and how things are working. So there are also here softwares, applications that will help for audio recording. So as a teacher, I can put out a question and I can put it up on a forum, and the student need not type back. The student can just record their voice and share the link. Then Vakru is one of those apps where you can record and you can share the students can share their recordings there for the facilitator teacher to look at it. Quizlet helps you with preparing quizzes for children. Google Classrooms also helps you with conducting classes, conducting quizzes for children. So, and there's Diksha again, our ministry's own app, which has a whole lot of resources that are there, and we can use all of these resources to make the teaching learning process much more creative and much more collaborative, where the children start taking active part in their learning, and there are various ways in which we are able to represent content to them. There are also some of these free resources that are there. Google, Microsoft, there's also Chrome, which have accessibility features. So if you go onto these links, you can enhance the font size, you can change the font color, you can have the text being read out to you, various kinds of facilities specifically there for people with disabilities. Now, these not necessarily will only benefit the children with disabilities. These can be used by anybody in the classroom, depending on the kind of learning styles that the student has, and it helps them to enhance their learning experience. Then there are also assistive technologies that are there. Assistive technologies are anything, any software that is going to help a person with disability overcome their challenges, which is going to help them reduce that barrier that's there and help them function better within the environment that's there. So something as simple as a wheelchair or even a pencil grip is a good to go thing under assistive technology. A student who's not good at maths, who would probably always make errors in their calculation, you can give them a calculator, and that's the assistive technology that you've given them. As long as they've understood the concept, they know which formula to apply, we can let them use that calculator and let them get going with the thing, rather than getting them stuck on a particular problem because they're getting the calculations wrong every time. So there are these support systems that are there, extensively there, that we could be using to make our teaching learning much more engaging and benefit the learners. These again, so I would recommend that all of us could just go on this website, www.understood.org. It has a whole lot of resources. I will just try and share. Stop sharing. So these have a whole lot of resources that that can be used in the classroom for specific kinds of issues that the children are facing. So if I have a child with, just trying to get the link on, yeah. So if I have a child in my classroom who's got a difficulty with reading and they're not able to read content well enough, I could use any of these sources listed out here. This is an excellent site that's there. It's very well organized. It's very easy to maneuver through it, and it shows you a whole lot of options that you can be used in the classroom to support the learning. So there's text to speech, and if you click on this link, it will take you to another set of another page where you'll have a list of all kinds of technology that you can use for this particular task. So similarly, they have this list for various kinds of disabilities that we as teachers face in the classroom, and teachers can be encouraged to use these. Like I said, I will share this so that the links are there. The sad part is, yes, that these links are or these apps are in English, and we do not have too much within for our Indian languages. A few do have translations for language learning, storytelling, and things like that. There are apps that can be used in different languages. So Hindi, Telugu, Marathi are languages that can be used there. But so we at TIS also do realize this problem that's there, that's restricting the use of assistive technology and these applications for our students. So some of us from the Azim Premji School of Education at Hyderabad and the CETE at Mumbai are working at developing educational resources for inclusive education. So we're developing 2 physical resource centers and also a virtual resource center, and we are going to be launching it soon. And once we do that, we will share the link with you all so that you can further share it with your teachers and it can be used in the classrooms also. So I'll stop at this. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Open to questions once we open the question session.
Thank you, Dr. Sadi. There's a 25-minute slot for panel discussion and Q&A. So perhaps I could request the participants to wait for that session. But thank you so much for, first of all, bringing out the different strands of diversity which have in them the potential to exclude gender, socio-cultural aspects, geographical, socio-economic, different abilities, etc. Yeah, it is also very interesting, Dr. Sani, to note how you have brought about uh, how technology can be an enabler of inclusion, which hitherto was not possible in, let's say, in the physical mode. And I think, thank you also for enumerating the different apps and the inclusive feature of well-known sites like Google and Microsoft, and also touching upon assistive technology. Thanks a lot for presenting your ideas. Yeah, I will now I will introduce Mr. Andrew Moore and request Professor Padma Sarangpani to invite Mr. Moore on the panel. Mr. Andrew Moore is the Chief Information Officer for the Boulder Valley School District located in Boulder, Colorado. He is responsible for providing IT and instructional technology services for 4,200 employees and 30,000 students. He's engaged at the local, state, and federal levels to eliminate the homework gap, which informs his decision-making on policy and programs to ensure an equitable learning opportunity for all the students. Before joining the school district, Mr. Moore was a senior director at the Sun Micro Systems, responsible for a 125% global IT team. His government experience was developed during 3 terms as mayor of the town of Erie, a 25,000-person suburb of the Boulder. Mr. Moore holds degrees in computer science, sociology, and an MBA. Professor Sarangpani, I request you to kindly invite Mr. Moore over to the panel.
So I'm really pleased to. Thank you very much, Andrew, for accepting our invitation. And so we interacted many years ago, and we are very pleased to have you on this important panel to interact with Indian school heads. So over to you.
Wonderful. Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be able to speak with you today and to reconnect with some of my Indian colleagues and friends that I developed when I visited your country back in 2015. I was there to basically study how technology is being used in your school districts. I was able to visit schools in New Delhi, Old Delhi, in the rural parts of Bangalore, and down to Chennai. It was about 10 days in your country that are so memorable to me. So I'm happy to be here to share a little bit more about what we're doing in America and specifically in Boulder, Colorado. Can you guys see my slides? I can't confirm that from my end.
Yes, we can see your slides.
All right, excellent. So let me just start off by giving kind of an outline of where I'm going to go on this journey today. I'm going to talk just a little bit about Boulder, but talk about the challenges with getting back to school in the middle of the pandemic. I know that's affecting all of us worldwide, and it's such an important thing to address and acknowledge as we go into this school year. I'll share a little bit about our strategic plan and how we're working to close our own achievement gap between the highest learners and those who are struggling in our district. And then I'll shift over to the software that we're using to run the business of education. And then at the end, I'll look forward to the panel where I can answer, or hopefully answer, any of your questions that you have specific to the talks today. Okay, so first off, where's Boulder? Boulder is in the state of Colorado. We're in the heart of America. It is where the Rocky Mountains basically come together. If you've never been to America, there's a huge mountain range that runs north to south. It separates the country. I live right at that area where the rains and snows that are on the eastern side of the mountains, which is where I live, it drains to the Atlantic Ocean, and the western side drains to the Pacific Ocean. It is a beautiful part of our country, and I encourage all of you to come visit Boulder, Colorado when you have that opportunity. All right, so our school district is 54 schools, about 30,000 students, 2,400 teachers, and we serve 9 communities, of which Boulder itself is one of those 9. We're considered a mid-sized school district. So there's school districts with over 300,000 students, but there's also school districts with less than 100 students, depending on where they're located in our state and our country. I've personally been in this job for over a decade after spending over 20 years in the private sector doing IT work, most recently at Sun Microsystems, a high-tech company that was ultimately acquired by Oracle. All right, let's jump in. So we have just started school again a couple weeks ago, and we're back 5 days a week. Padma discussed the challenges with the pandemic and understanding that kids have missed out on learning opportunity. So much of what I'm talking about today is not only our ongoing business of education, but it's also to identify the students that have fallen behind and to ensure that we are providing adequate resources to bring them back up to speed. So just a few more pictures here of our back to school. These are elementary students just from a couple of weeks ago, the smiles on their faces after being away for so long. And then our secondary students up through 12th grade or high school before moving on to university. All right, let's talk just briefly about what our strategy is in Boulder, Colorado for good, inclusive student outcomes. I love the fact that Sonia talked about our special needs, students with special needs, to engage them. We absolutely do that. And it could be because of physical disabilities, but it could also be because of challenges that students are born with, whether it's autism, Down syndrome, many different conditions that our students have that I'm sure you share in India as well. But we have a 3-pronged approach to address all students. The first one is to make sure that our curriculum is what we call igniting our students, that the curriculum is relevant and challenging so that the students are drawn in to what we are teaching. The second pillar of our work here is to equip students with the right tools. It could be software, but it could be adaptive equipment as well. It could be different types of help or tutoring that happens either during the school day or after school. And then the last goal that we have is to ensure that all of our students are able to soar with the skills they need post-graduation. And that does not mean that we are expecting all of our students to go on to a 4-year university. Some may go on to a 2-year university. Some may go to trade schools, learning the trades like plumbing or electrical, house building, the things that we need in society where you don't necessarily need a college degree, but those learnings are so important to all of us in our society. So all this comes together in the slogan we use, and that's all together for all students. And that's just a reminder to all of us that regardless of the challenge any one student is having, we will work together to find the path for that student and support them appropriately. So what does our infrastructure look like in the way that we actually ensure that everybody is getting an equitable opportunity? First and foremost is we have a common scope and sequence. So this is the what students are going to learn. It is standardized across our district and has only recently been standardized across the 54 schools so that all first graders are learning from the same standards. All 8th graders are learning from the same standards and so forth. The second part of this is the assessment for the students is balanced. It's not just about the grades. It's also about the social emotional well-being of our students so that we look at the whole person and can understand that if maybe a student isn't performing so well on a math assessment, are there bigger challenges this particular student is facing? So we want to make sure we assess more than just the hard, here's a test on math or science or language art, reading, writing, or so forth. The how portion of this is our consistent instructional model, and it's a foundational practices on how the teachers teach. So if you think of the common scope and sequence as what we're teaching, our infrastructure is standardized on how teachers teach. And then last is what we call our multi-tiered system of supports. And so that allows us to get the right supports to the students, whatever their need may be. We also are making sure that our curriculum is delivered in a culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy. We're making sure that students that, for our district, a lot of students speak Spanish. And so we want to make sure that, especially for the younger students, that we're providing the materials in a language they understand and can help transition them over time into being able to speak English and to be able to interact in English, which is the primary language in America. And then we have common instructional units and collaborative structures for using the data. And I'm going to hit on this in the very last thing that I do today, which is show you an application called Catch On, which runs on our network and tells us all the software that is being used in our buildings down to the student level. I'll get into more detail on that. It's very powerful, and I believe it could help any school or school district around the world. All right, before I get into the software, this is the last slide that I'm going to share on our instructional model. But think about our instructional model as iterative. And I'm going to go around this wheel here and talk about the different components. You're going to see a lot of text. I'm not going to read all this text, but these slides will be made available for you so that if you want to view this after the presentation, it'll give you a little more context of what I'm now going to share with you. So the first stage of helping us educate our students is to engage with the students' experiences and strengths. So this is part of that Ignite portion of the 3 pillars I talked about before, finding the relevant things to engage our students with so they want to learn, so they're interested in learning. The second part is to set goals for each individual student. Once those goals are set, they'll know what they need to learn and what success will look like on their journey in learning whatever topic it is. The third portion of this is to guide the learning, and this is really where the teachers become critical. It's an active model where, regardless of the grade, the teachers are setting out the right curriculum based on the common scope and sequence to ensure that our students are actually learning what they need to learn. Then we come into the reflecting and reinforcing the learnings. And once the teachers are feeling confident that the students have learned what they need to, there's an assessment that is done. This whole cycle is repeated as teachers go through the course curriculum and the scope and sequence for whatever the learning model is. For those of you that are very tech savvy, you may recognize this as looking a lot like the agile software development methods, where you're taking out bite-sized chunks of development, you're running those in sprints, you're delivering, you're testing, and then once they're good to go, you repeat the cycle and choose the next piece of development that you need to do. So very similar and repeatable in our functions. Okay, so let me shift my discussion now to software and the software we use to run the business of education. So I'm going to focus primarily on the business software, not the educational software, but I will come back to the educational software when I talk about Catch On and what we can see in our organization with the software that's being run. All right, let me just start big picture, the boring stuff that we have to do. That's for financials, procurement, inventory. We use a system called Infor. Infor is a competitor to Oracle, SAP, Workday, Microsoft Dynamics. Those are all paid for products, as is Infor. It is not cheap software, very expensive, but there are open source options that I put a link down at the bottom so that if you're looking for ways to effectively run the financial side of your organizations, you can certainly find some alternatives within the open source community. In the HR world, they also use Infor for posting jobs, for paying our employees. So Infor is kind of an integrated system that does finance and HR. But the centerpiece here is about performance, and we use a tool called Performance Manners to basically ensure that we are setting goals for all of our staff, including teachers and principals, and that we're reviewing how the teachers are doing against their goals. This tool, Performance Matters, helps us organize the discussions, helps ensure the goals are set, ensures that we're able to recognize when the goals are doing well, or to provide more feedback and direction when there's challenges meeting the goals. So I think of this as just one of our key parts of our organization to help us all grow. And then once again, I have some open source options for performance management down at the bottom. Our student information system is Infinite Campus. I don't know if this is a global system, but Infinite Campus is used heavily in America and certainly in Colorado. It basically is where all of our courses, assessments, attendance, discipline records, grade books, a parent portal. So parents can check on their students and how they're doing anytime they'd like. And then of course, health records, where we keep information like vaccinations. COVID vaccines are not required yet, but if they do become required, that type of data would be stored in this centralized place. Out there that are used in our state, but there's also open source alternatives to these student information systems. Let me now transition to our learning management system. So we're starting to get into the classroom now. When the pandemic hit and we all went remote, so 30,000 students remote, including our youngest learners, pre-K, all the way through 12th grade, we realized that we were sort of using a learning management system in some schools at some grades. That all changed, and it's now a requirement for all of our teachers to use Schoology at the secondary level and Seesaw at the primary. Two tools that handle the administration of teaching. They're able to track and report and automate the delivery of educational courses. Teachers put assignments into Schoology and Seesaw, then students can download those assignments, they can do their work, and students can then upload the product of their work back into Seesaw and Schoology, where the teachers can then see it and grade it. This was, in all honesty, a lifesaver, a time saver, a resource saver when the pandemic hit, and we needed to get better with our ability to manage the classrooms remotely. There are some open source options for the LMS, or Learning Management System world that Schoology and Seesaw live in. And then Google, we are a Google shop. We transitioned off the Microsoft platform 8 years ago, and we transitioned first for the classroom. So teachers were actually the ones who drove the transition. They wanted the collaboration capabilities of Google, Google Docs, so their students could collaborate with each other. Google Slides, which I'm using right now, so that you can have multiple people working on that slide deck simultaneously. But as it started to take hold in our classrooms, it also took hold at the administration level. It is very rare for me to see any of my peers in the administration of school using Excel, PowerPoint. All of that has been shifted over to the Google world. I bring this up as a key piece of software because there are free versions of Google Workspaces for Education. We are actually paying for an enterprise edition that gives us additional features in Google Meet and a tool called Originality Reports that helps check for plagiarism. So we're willing to pay a little bit of money to Google for that, as it saves time and ensures that students are doing their own work. So teachers can actually see the screens on our students' Chromebooks. They can limit the URLs that students are able to go to, so that if you have a math class and the teacher knows that they're only going to go to one site, the teachers can then limit, so those students in the class for that period of time can only go to that site, restricting them from going to things like YouTube that may distract them, or to chat, which also could distract them. There are paid competitors out there, but there's also, there aren't very many open source alternatives that I've seen in this space, but I did provide the link to GoGuardian itself if you're interested in this type of software. All right, and now this is the last piece of software I'm going to talk about. I'm actually going to show it to you. It's called Catch On, and we just implemented it last May. It runs on our network, and it monitors what software is being utilized across the district, down to the building level or the school level, and then down into the classroom and into the individual student level. There's parts of it I will not show you due to student data privacy concerns, but I think you'll get the gist of the tool as I go into it. So bear with me as I switch screens there. Okay, once again, I can't see if you could see this, but can you see the dashboard now at this point?
Yes, Mr. Moore, we can see you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, the dashboard is loading right now. I'm going to click into the trending applications. And what it's doing right now is just looking since September 8th. So it's only been a week of data that it's looking at here. But I can change this to go back as far as 6 months of usage. And so then it brings up, sorted by usage level, every piece of software that it is seeing on our network. And you'll see ClassLink is our single sign-on system. That's our highest used app. That's because everybody has to go there. But you'll also see Google Search and Google Docs as part of this, and then Schoology, heavily used applications. As I scroll down a little bit, though, you'll start to see tools that are used in the classroom. iReady over on the right-hand side is an assessment system. And in the last week, we've had 5,280 students who have actually gotten in and been assessed. It is an assessment system for our youngest learners. Dreambox is a math application to help students with their math skills. And it's adaptive so that once you learn a concept, it will move you past that. If you don't learn a concept, it will help you with different types of presentation until you actually achieve whatever the learning is in there. And so very helpful to see what is being utilized. I'm going to go over to the second page, and I'll actually bring up Seesaw, which is over here to the left, which I spoke about before. And I can click on this little drop down, and I can look at the application profile. Student data privacy is a huge thing for us in America. And what Catch On has done is gone out and looked at the privacy policies. And they've also given us links into third-party organizations that rank the application for their data privacy levels. And you can see right here that Seesaw is regulatory compliant with GDPR, the EU's Student Data Privacy Agreement, FERPA and COPA, which are both the United States data privacy and data usage policy, and it is approved for children under 13. And so this is an easy way for administrators to go in and actually check out software before they deploy it to make sure that the company is doing the right thing with regard to data privacy. The last thing I'll show here, let me click on that. We'll bring back up Seesaw, and then I will show you how you actually get into where it's being used and by how many people. So right here, usage by campuses, and right now it's going out just looking at Seesaw for the last week, and it will show me a list of the schools that are utilizing it. And so this helps us understand where it's being used. These are all elementary schools. The not rostered, that's actually a problem in our data that now that I'm seeing that, I'll need to get fixed. But my point being here is, if you've got a school that is accelerating using any of your software and they're doing really well, you can actually see what schools are not using that software. And it may be software that you want to introduce into that school that maybe not doing as well to help with the learning process. Okay, I'm going to go back, and I think I just have one more slide here. Yep, this is the last slide. I'm going to be excited to answer any of your questions you may have. This is was our "We Are Together for All Students" slide as we did return back to school. All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Moore. Very, very informative session. I'm sure many participants would like to request you to share, if it is possible, the list of tools that you have enumerated. And I think I will now request Professor Padma Sarangpani to please take forward the panel discussion. Ma'am, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was such a really rich set of presentations from all of you. We're really grateful to this. I'm going to ask audience to post their questions in the chat. I hope all of you have access to chat, and I will pick up questions from there that I would relay back to you. But just to get us going while participants ask their questions, I would like to ask all three of you, Ritesh, Sonia, and Andrew, on what worked well during the pandemic and what didn't. Any insights that you have from your own area of work? So Ritesh, any observations on your panel focus and how you assess what worked and what didn't during the pandemic?
Thank you for this question, Padma. I think the pandemic, on one hand, opened the challenge of relating to the learner in more significant or meaningful ways. And it also, led us to reflect on the kinds of, or the modes that we can, diversity of modes that we can pick up to relate to learning. And at the same time, think or plan about possibilities of integrating learners' responses into shaping the teaching. So in that kind of a dialectic that became evident between a more proactive role of the learner in actually shaping the learning, I think is something at the heart or the core of things. But at the same time, we also were moved to look at ways by which we can punctuate our teaching at various points of time, into modular ideas, and then invite or open the floor for receiving suggestions. So I think that's another thing. And the third thing is certainly the platform or the enabling environment that made it possible for learners to also share their work with each other. So I remember distinctly that at one point we were so hell-bent on not having mobile phones in a classroom. But suddenly the equation changed and we wanted, so much desired for our learners to have the mobile phone and share their works with us. So I think this kind of a radical change and the opening up of possibilities was quite liberating at the same time for the teacher as such. So
thank you, Ritesh. I think it's an interesting point, how it intensifies the core of what is education, isn't it? It's intensified that for us. Sonia, any thoughts you have?
I think at some point, from a teacher's perspective, was very frustrating because cameras off, you don't know the student's reaction. And as a teacher, we're looking at students to gauge whether they're understanding or not understanding. The interesting thing for me was that when I said this to my class, there were a few who made it a point to switch on their cameras. And they did try and communicate that the way we are finding this whole system to be new when we are struggling, so is the faculty, and let's be supportive. That was one thing that really worked well, where we put the onus on them to help us, where we like communicated to them that we are as helpless as you, and they took charge and they wanted to support us. And that then I think also helped them to understand the issues that their peers were facing because of lack of access to technology. So they would call up their peers. If somebody was not able to connect via the internet, they would make phone calls and put the person on speaker and make sure that, you know, the peers were understanding what's happening, and they would follow up. Many of them. So this kind of support system, which started with the first years. So otherwise, we kind of take the credit that we are, you know, making them conscious that they need to be the support for the ones coming from rural backgrounds or having language issues. But the first years took charge. That was something that I found really interesting, that they were ready to take the onus on to themselves and take things forward for the class.
I think that's really an important response, isn't it? A kind of a responsibility that students themselves demonstrated. So, Andrew, in your context.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing time when we first went remote and we realized that, oh my gosh, we've got 30,000 students at home, and how do we get them connected? So to Ritesh's point about the mobile phones, all of a sudden became important. We embarked on 2 initiatives, and I'll put 2 infographics in the chat here in a second. But one of them was we developed a very inexpensive system called REVIS. It's an acronym for the Remote Educational Video Audio System. And really what it is just a high definition, high sensitivity camera and microphones that we mounted on a tripod. And then we got a large monitor, 27-inch monitor. And it was driven by a Chromebook to connect into Google Meet, similar to Zoom. And it allowed the teachers to be able to broadcast clearly. Both their video was clear, the audio was clear, and the students then at home were getting a feed that was much better than if they were just trying to broadcast off of their PC or their Chromebook. The cost of the unit turned out to be a little over $200 a piece. We got federal assistance money as part of the US government's aid to help us get through the pandemic that ultimately paid for these devices. And then the second thing is we had a program that had just started and gotten through a pilot phase before the pandemic hit called Connect Me, or Connect My Education. And it basically is working with a private company to put LTE internet antennas on our buildings, and we give them free space in exchange for them giving free internet to all of our students who federally qualify for government aid. And we were able to connect up hundreds of students for free that did not have adequate internet before the pandemic hit.
Yeah, that's really remarkable that you were able to mobilize this kind of support for students who needed it. I was just wondering in relation to that, and I'd really like to ask all 3 of you to reflect on this as well. Two aspects. One is, what kind of institutional support was necessary, and so from the institutional perspective, what kind of support was made available to teachers and to students? You've already indicated one, Andrew, but I'd like you to tell us more. And I also want you to reflect a little bit on how you supported teachers to become resourceful and find local solutions. What were you able to do as a school system to do that? And similarly, Sonia, Ritesh, I'd like you to reflect on both of these, either from your experience or in terms of what you think should have happened. Andrew, please go ahead. And then.
Yeah, for us, the CARES Act is what it was called. That was the federal program. And it not only funded REVIS, as I mentioned, but it also funded new devices, new Chromebooks for our teachers, because the devices they had were never purchased with enough power to do Zoom and Google Meet. And so early on in the pandemic, they were struggling. But we got federal funding to go in and be able to purchase those. Now, supply chains were a problem. I imagine you guys were feeling that pinch too, or actually getting the devices was a challenge, but ultimately we did get them in, and that helped us. But there was also other federal aid that is continuing, by the way, to ensure that every student had meals delivered to their home. And so it used to be that we only got aid for students that qualified for help. During the pandemic, we took all the constraints off. And when we came back to school this year, the federal government is funding lunch for everybody. And I'm hopeful that'll stay because it just takes any stigma out of the program. Everybody can have lunch if they want it. So key aspects to make sure our students were fed so that they could actually learn.
Really lovely. And what about teacher resourcefulness and finding solutions locally?
Yeah, so we have a good support infrastructure internal. And so if we didn't have software that was needed, we have a policy that's in place where teachers can use any type of software that's free, but they just have to make sure they read the data privacy of that software before they approve it for their class usage. So I would say we already had a pretty liberal policy in place that just helped our teachers be able to pivot and do what they needed for their own, in particular, classes. We also, one other thing, students who are learning digital arts, engineering, they used to come into labs. Well, you couldn't come into labs anymore to run, SolidWorks, Autodesk, the Adobe Creative Suite, Illustrator, Photoshop, etc., because the schools were off limit. And Chromebooks won't run those programs natively, and Chromebooks are primarily what our students have. So we set up virtual Windows sessions that students could log into. And ironically, that has now changed the way that we deliver those applications. The labs are going away now that they're back, and their workstations are basically just a monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, and they plug their Chromebooks into that and then access these high-powered workstations to learn computer science, engineering, and digital arts.
Okay, super, yeah. Sonia, any thoughts from you? Yeah.
I think we received, there was some hand-holding for us. We got that orientation session on how to go about with the new TESOL platform and also with Zoom. That equipped us to be able to take things forward. So even those of us who were technologically challenged, we knew what to do. Otherwise, in class, I know I used to always tell students, come help me, because suddenly the PowerPoint would stop. I wouldn't know what to do. I think the training helped me become a little more self-sufficient and confident of working with technology. On aspects of, I think what we as teachers did was to be more supportive of students, realizing the backgrounds that they come from. I know we as a school have sponsored data cards for students and things like that because they were not able to afford it. The institute has sent out laptops wherever possible. So we've tried our level best to meet those requirements also.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ritesh, any reflections on teacher autonomy in schools?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, this pandemic has also opened up this question of the role and agency of teacher centrally in this entire functioning of the system. At one point, I'll not go more into the platform and support, but what really amazes me, and till now I try to reflect on this part, is, suddenly there was the push or a need that was felt for more applications, virtual applications, applications that could be integrated within the mobile phones, applications that could be a part of the laptop systems. So there, it's as if there is a technological determinism in play, in live action that got initiated. But at the same time, what really worried me was about the introspection of the need for education and the experience that makes learning possible. So several of the teachers have reflected on it. They have revised their ways or approaches of engaging with learning, which is very positive. And perhaps we need to have some system by which we can consolidate these developments on this front. But at the same time, what is interesting is how learner contributes to the ownership of learning. without, so earlier it was the resource crunch, now it's the application of the interface crunch. But technology is also about the social interface of how one relates to. And one of the reasons that we recognize that students were so hesitant to turn on their videos was because of the environment in which they were sitting. There were families members moving around, and they had to match their own schedules with the class schedules. So on a lot of fronts, although there are systems in place, there is how an individual reciprocates or responds to that kind of a system. And perhaps we need to, engage with this idea of social interface with educational technology to be able to see how best we can optimize this kind of a relationship.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
May I interfere here?
Yes, of course.
One response got from the participant from the YouTube channel, Susmita Datta. Pandemic taught children different types of learning in distance mode from school level with the technological glitches or net problem, and in few cases lack of smartphones were taught, where through TV students learned. So that her reflection that I would like to bring this one. One more thing, according to my experience, what I've seen, particularly in the government sector, the schools and the government sector, where really the parents actually were not much involved in the learning process. But in this pandemic period, we have seen children and the parents sit together and they learn together. That's a collaborative effort that was happened. And first time, I think they appreciated the role of the teachers, how they are taking a keen interest in children's learning. That's a very good thing, good positive sign that we have come across from the parent. That's a reaction of the parents. And second one, what I feel, of course, this technological exposure is there one side for the children, and those who are not having that exposure, but they had a very good ample opportunities for the children to interact with their family members, for a long considerable time, you can say, or they have interaction with the peer students and also the community. I think this indirect learning happened apart from the technological switch off is also there. So that's what I felt this is type of learning, independent learning or self-learning, that things are happened among the student community, what I feel.
Yeah, I think those are really interesting observations, Suresh Babu Garu, on how the pandemic has really altered the relationships within the home and with the process of learning itself. There are questions in the chat box, particularly reflecting to the equity questions around technology access, which are, as everybody knows, are very important in the Indian context. And certainly most of our participants are directly involved with and engaged with and have experienced this huge technology divide. In fact, in a recent study, it was found that teachers altered their own working schedules so that they could interact with students when parents were back home and the children had access to devices. Because during the day, parents took away devices to their own workplaces. So it was early in the morning or late in the evening that teachers were interacting with students whenever possible. And needless to say, the cost of data is something that we haven't factored in terms of what students ultimately are able to access as well. So any other reflections that you have on ways in which the learning could continue during the pandemic without technology maybe, or with other kinds of technology other than ICT and computer, which seems to have become ubiquitous now. So any reflections on alternative kinds of technologies and modalities and other learning spaces that could be opened up to students?
So Padma, as Suresh was talking about parent engagement, I think there's some positives that are going to come out of the pandemic that will stick with us. For example, parent-teacher conferences. It used to be that the teachers would all come into the big gyms at our schools, and the teachers would all be sitting around at tables on the perimeter, and the parents would seek out the teachers for a conversation. Well, we couldn't do that in the pandemic, so we started to use Google Meet for that. And we realized that, oh my gosh, this is so much more convenient for the parents, and it's so much easier to manage for the teachers that I think that is going to be a practice that stays with us so that it's easier to engage parents in this process. And then Suresh is spot on. We saw parents sitting side by side, especially with some of our youngest learners, and helping the youngest learners navigate the technology, but also learning in the sense that we have a lot of parents that speak Spanish as their primary language, and they were able to engage with their student and actually be part of the learning process as well in some cases. So I would say those were positives that'll stick with us.
Ma'am, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was just wondering, we've been through educational TV, we have had educational radio. So have some of these older technologies really ceased to be relevant in the educational space? Any thoughts on that?
I've heard of teachers who have prepared kits of the content. So they've got Xeroxes or made worksheets and mailed them off to students' houses and then called them up and guided them on what to work and help them go through it. Some of them who, before the online class, they call up the student to let the student know what the agenda is for the day and what they're going to work on, so that the students, especially the ones who are having difficulties coping up with this online mode. And then once the lesson is done, they would again call up to say, okay, now what are your doubts? So also teachers said that on the online mode, students were found to, they felt embarrassed to put out that, oh, I can't understand what's happening, because somehow this face-to-face thing made them feel more in focus rather than what it's like in the class. So this thing of calling them up post-class was something that worked well for many of these students. And a lot of emotional issues that the students started discussing with teachers there too, because the pandemic brought on all of that. There was loss of livelihoods for quite a few of the children, and deaths in the family and things like that. So the teachers have, quickly moved to that role of a counselor and been there for the students and supported them during those hard times too. Mm-hmm. That was something that really, I think, touched me, that the students feel the connect with the teacher to be able to speak up to them this way.
Ritesh, any thoughts? And then
madam.
Suresh Garu, please.
In this pandemic period, what happened in the government sector? Well, many teachers, in spite of this pandemic or lockdown, many teachers took initiative to visit the houses of the children. In that interaction, of course, when even the programs were broadcasted or telecasted through TV or other channels, or you can say through webinars, what I think. But the personal visits made something comforting for the children to address their grievances or the learning issues sorted out. Many teachers took initiative that one. Even the education officials also visited, even the collectors and the DHU, district education officer, also visited the home. That has become a routine affair right now.
Yeah, that's, I think, really important, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a personal touch. That's
so essential to make the student feel that they are valued and we're concerned. Ritesh, any last thoughts? And then I'll wrap it up and hand it back to Karthik.
Just two ideas that are coming to my mind. One of the things that we noticed was about students recording their voices and sending it back as a kind of a response. So even though they were not able to write or work on certain things, they would make efforts to either make a sketch or send a short audio file. I think this is really some vibrant need that is there, which kind of challenges us to rethink about the assessment and the possibility that we can trust the learner, and the learner can themselves think about how they are progressing with regard to overall thinking. So I think that kind of an aspect is very critical. And also the idea of, a certain liberal space or in learning rather, I mean, we have certain lot of thrust nowadays, for adaptive testing and continuous frequent assessments that is being suggested in NEP 2020. But at the same time, we also need to reflect if, greater space and greater diversity in terms of assessment or looking at modalities of assessment would actually build a connect, a trust, with trustful partnership, which is long sustained between the teachers and the learners. So perhaps this is some kind of an opening that has come up from the pandemic, and perhaps we need to also reimagine our teaching learning and also the kind of content issues that we engage with, whether health education is to be centrally placed within the context of teaching learning.
Thank you. Yeah.
At this juncture, I will recall one experience, madam. I found some students actually they did experimentation with science experiments at their home using the kitchenware. They use the chemicals, like the wood chemicals, but only the kitchen items or the vegetables, they use the chemicals. And apart from that, actually the entire episode was shooted and sent back to the teachers. With the help of the parents, they did. Even the parents are also participated in that one. So that such things are happened.
Yes, absolutely. I think that wherever teachers have been able to stimulate and support learners to become active in the learning process, the technology has worked in those contexts, and it has not left learners passive, rather has been able to, wherever we've been able to make learners active, I think technology, we've been able to overcome and even use technology meaningfully. I'm particularly struck by the very positive possibilities of technology. We've been able to get somebody like Andrew far away in Boulder to interact so meaningfully with us today. And I'm really grateful for the time you've taken, Andrew, to be with us. And what is really striking is that although our contexts are so different, listening to you has been immensely illuminating and educative. And I think more opportunities to build this international community and learn from each other's experiences would be so empowering to solve problems in our own context, but with a year and with picking up ideas from what you have tried there and what has worked for you. So we're really very grateful to you for having made the time to be with us today and sharing this rich, immensely rich set of experiences and how you have approached common problems, but obviously with different resources, different readiness, and ultimately making sure that education reaches every child for whom you are responsible. So we're very grateful to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's my pleasure to be here. You never know where inspiration is going to come from. And the Connect Me program I shared, my inspiration for that came from my trip to India, when I realized that it doesn't matter if you're not connected to the internet in India or in Boulder, Colorado, you are not getting an equitable educational experience. And it really was that trip there that I embarked on Connect Me back here in America.
So great to know that. Thank you again. Thank you, Ritesh. Thank you, Sonia.
Madam, shall we take a few questions from the chat?
I've been picking it up and asking
okay.
the questions from the
fine.
chat as well. I did that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ritesh. Thank you, Sonia, for very well-researched, informative, and rich with your own experiences, ideas that you have shared today with the participants, heads of schools of Telangana. Thank you for making time and staying up late in the evening to participate in this event. Given that Hyderabad is right there, we're definitely looking forward to more possibilities of interacting and having you involved with work going forward. Suresh Babu Garu, I'm not going to thank you, but I'm going to hand it back to you and Karthik to bring the session to a closure. Thank you very much for enabling us to participate in this and interacting with you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. I remind all the participants to be present tomorrow. Tomorrow we have the second sessions which starts from 2:30 p.m. I hope all the participants will be there on the Zoom platform, as well as the same program will be mainstream through YouTube channels. Over to Karthik.
Thank you, sir. I'll just propose the formal vote of thanks. I think I'm sure many participants will agree that this has been an extremely interesting session. On behalf of the School Leadership Academy, SCERT Telangana, and clicks a heartfelt thanks to Professor Padma Sarangpani. Ma'am, thanks a lot for really taking time out and being a part of this. Thank you also to Professor Ritesh and Professor Sonia from TIS Hyderabad. At very short notice, you have kindly agreed to be a part of this program. Thanks a lot. Special thanks to Mr. Moore. I should inform that Boulder is 11 and a half hours behind IST. So it's early in the morning for Mr. Moore, and he's very kindly agreed. And thank you also for making the presentation bespoke, because based on our request, we have seen that you have enumerated also the open resources that are available that are similar to the ones that you are using. So thanks a lot. And thanks a lot, and good night to all of you.
Karthik, please turn your video on. Let's just get a quick shot before the session
Sure,
closes.
sure,
Yeah, please do. Yeah, just do a quick snip. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Good night.